Will this be LeBron's last season in the NBA? Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about that and if it is or isn't. I think if you think it is, I think you could come up with a few different reasons as to why. And if you think it's not, maybe next year would be his last and you can make arguments as for why. I think there's different things. For example, Bryce next year, if you wanted to point towards that, or this year 23 for number 23, going to have the All-Star game in LA. And if you're going to combo that with a retirement tour, that would be a pretty nice send-off for him. And he also gets to retire on his terms in LA. But one of the things that we've been talking about is that, and I thought it really popped up as a talking point when he decided to opt into his contract, which is something he doesn't do, right? This is the first time in his career he's really done that and been in the situation for multiple different things. He's never really been in the situation where a team is prioritizing somebody 100% over him, right? He's also never been obviously 40 at the end of his career, but I think he's been very real about that. He's talked about it just flat out himself, how Luka needs to make the best decision for himself. LeBron's not going to be there. He can't base what he does based on him. He said all these things, and I think he gets along great with Luka. He said he'd love to play with Luka. He said, all these different things along the time. So I don't think there's any drama like between those two. Like ESPN maybe tried to flip it a little bit, but ultimately, though, we've gotten since that a couple of weeks ago report from Rich Paul saying, hey, we understand that the Lakers are trying to build for the future. And that's honestly what a team should be doing. Like, I think if you were to lay it out, aside from names, like a team prioritizing their 40-year-old superstar or their 26-year-old superstar, I think most teams would say prioritize the 26-year-old, right? Rich Paul said, we understand the Lakers are trying to do that, but LeBron basically wants to keep his options open. To paraphrase, you'd have to go back and pull up the whole thing. I don't want to do that in this video, take it too much time. But I think that sparked a lot of controversy because that turns into, oh, does LeBron want to trade this and that? And since then, that has been refuted. We got a report earlier today from Dan Wojcicki that LeBron is expected to be on the roster, which should be the expectation anyway because he opted into a contract. But I do think that the fact that he opted in, he's in a situation here where I've said before in the past that I do wonder if he gets out of this, like he comes out, like say like a year from now, we hit next year's free agency. Say he wanted to play another year. What do you guys think the Lakers do at that point? Because I've said I don't know if there's a, and it's not because of him, like the quality of the player he is. I think they're just kind of ready to move on. I've questioned whether or not there would be another contract for him on the other side of that. And as a result, if he wants to retire specifically in LA, he almost would be forced to do so if he's not thinking that he's going to get another contract next year. I think that's an underlying thing in all of this altogether, right? There's always the possibility of him being a free agent next year. There should be more teams that have money and all that stuff, and he can go somewhere else like a Cleveland and sign there, or maybe he could take a below market value deal. He's historically not done that, but he's also historically not opted into his contract either, right? So who knows ultimately how things look a year from now, but I do expect him to run it back this year. I don't expect him to get traded, to ask out. And this is stuff you're going to hear all year long. We're going to get into the season, and man, if the Lakers sputter in any way during the season, that stuff is going to hit a fever pitch around New Year's into the trade deadline. Like, you're going to hear it a lot. Like, it's going to get really, really loud, whether he actually outwardly requests it or not. And maybe he does the subliminal thing where he's like trying to not put, I don't want to say subliminal, but like the low-key thing that he always does, where he's trying to, like, a passive thing where he's trying to put pressure, and he's like, oh, well, we kind of need this, right? So who knows ultimately what happens, but I'm, for one, excited to see him with Luka again. That's such a cool pairing. Just Luka, growing up idolizing LeBron, all that stuff, and seeing those two, the way that LeBron made his game super malleable to fit around Luka. But I've always thought that this whole thing is kind of weird because they want to build around the future, which is perfectly fine. Like I said earlier, that's understandable. LeBron himself has said that's understandable. But I think the Venn diagram crosses over where, like, you can build, and there are people that don't, by the way, think that you can build around both of these guys, but I think you can, and I think you can satisfy both ends. But we've gone through a 4-minute rant. Let's play the Dave video because we were staring at it.
To start thinking about it, this could be his last year in the league. And I think we have to start thinking about it. This could be his last year in the league. And so, Rich Paul told me, and I included this in my report on ESPN when I did sidelines for the Lakers over the weekend. Rich Paul told me, yeah, there was no extension talk because we didn't ask for an extension. We didn't broach the subject. Now, you could say, well, why didn't the Lakers offer it? Sure, you could, but Rich Paul's point to me was this wasn't a point of tension. It's not something that we were pursuing. And so I think you look at it like, yeah, there's a very limited time remaining in his career. We already kind of knew that. Like, we knew that basically since he reached 20 years in the league, he's gone into every offseason contemplating retirement.
Yeah, and he said the same. He's gotten criticized for it, but he said the same, that he's gone into these seasons like wondering if it's time for him to retire and things like that over the last few years. And he said that famously after the playoff loss against the Nuggets and stuff like that. But I mean, he is at a point where he's in uncharted territory for multiple reasons. We've never seen a guy play this deep, really, but especially not at this level. Like he was still an all NBA player and all that stuff. And he had a great stretch, especially in February, where he was the player of the month, especially that Knicks game right before. And that was like ultimately what kind of capped it off. But that stretch, and especially that Knicks game right before the Luka trade, the night of the Luka trade, in fact, like he was really, really rounding into form. The only thing that I kind of wonder about with him or with older guys like a KD, like I've said before in videos on the channel, is how do you shield yourself from these guys kind of peaking a little bit too early? Because, that's February and he was still really good after that. But like, what happens if a guy sustains an injury in March, right? Like, how do you kind of shield yourself from that? I think you need a lot of depth around that. And especially if LeBron is going to be a guy that's still going to command 35 plus minutes a night. The other guys that we've seen make it to this point relatively are guys that aren't playing anywhere near that amount of time. And even guys that get into their late 30s that are still really good, like a Tim Duncan, for example, they're playing less than that. What was Tim playing? Like 28 minutes a night per game or something like that? Like you're in an interesting situation with LeBron all around. But like I said earlier, I was encouraged by the way he really adapted his game. He was off the ball quite a lot, not only for Luka, but also for Austin in that stretch, especially. He's always kind of done that for Austin, but really both of them. And he just kind of parked his butt in the corner and played an entirely different game, turned into more of a slasher, catch and shoot guy, a situational playmaker. It's not anywhere near the LeBron that we're used to seeing, where he's the heliocentric, basically Luka, right? Or somebody like that, where he's the heliocentric guy, ball at the top of the key, run a million pick and rolls, ISO, kick it out, things like that. He's not playing that game anywhere near as much. And I think that the fact he was still able to be really good is a testament to how versatile he is as a player. And I also thought he really kicked it up a notch towards the end of the season, post-trade, and into the playoffs defensively. During the earlier stretch of that, he's still doing his thing where he's taking off, possessions, taking off games where he's not really trying to lock in on the defensive end, especially if he sees somebody across from him that he doesn't deem to be worth his effort, pretty much. He does do that sometimes. But, I think that's part of it too, is like when you have an older superstar, you have an inbuilt situation where and again, he's in a weird spot because there's not a lot of guys, but quietly there's a lot of guys in this era that are making it to the late parts of their career. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry's kind of approaching that as a late 30s guy at this point, approaching late 30s. Kyle Lowry, nowhere near, this talented at this point still, but he's like, 20 years in. Drew's almost 20 years in. Like quietly, a lot of guys in this era are like this. But obviously LeBron's still playing at such a high level. And like I said, I think it really was a testament to how versatile he is as a basketball player and what he can still do for you. But I mean, there's no question about it. His impact isn't anywhere near the same as it used to be. And some of that's just because of the fact that he has gotten older. But how do you shield yourself from the fact you have that inbuilt, he's not going to give 100% every night, because he's at a point now where he's not an 82 game guy. He's a 16 game guy. You got to go through the grind, though, to get to that point. So you do need that depth. You do need pieces around. And that's where people have criticized him for not taking a pay cut, things like that. For the record, if he were to take one, ironically, they still wound up getting their mid-level by DFS leaving. You would have loved to have kept DFS as well. But the reason DFS left seems to be because of other things, not so much the contractual situation. But if he had taken that cut, it wouldn't have really opened up a ton, right? So that's kind of the situation he's in. And yeah, I thought that he was going to stay, and people have criticized him for opting in because it's like, oh, do you really care about that? Do you really care about winning, things like that? But the way I see it is, if a guy is offered a $50 million deal, I mean, who's not really going to take that? So depends how you really perceive all of it. But ultimately, though, I think the Lakers have some decisions to make. There's some players on the roster they could ultimately decide to move on from. They should ultimately decide to move on from. But Rob isn't typically a guy that likes to make a lot of moves, particularly in the offseason, because he hasn't made a trade in the last 3 off seasons, including this one. So I wouldn't really expect all too much other than the much anticipated, much expected Shake Milton waiving. But LeBron will be on the roster this year, and LeBron is expected to be in potentially his last year, like I laid out earlier, because of the situation surrounding this. But if it isn't his last year, because it's not about quality of play so much. I think it's more about when you're a guy like LeBron, and I'll end on this. For one, he also said Savannah's pressuring him. She's like, you got 1 or 2 more years left. And I understand, man. Like, he's been playing the game for more than half of his life at this point. That's crazy to say. And he, as a result, has been away from her and from the family. And he's watched his kids grow up. He's been there. He's been a great dad, I'd say, from afar, from what I can tell. But he hasn't been in the house. He hasn't been around as much as he could have been because he's always on the road, right? And I think that it takes a lot to be able to do that for 20 years. So for like from the family and wife perspective, she's probably like, I want my husband now. It's been 20 years, 20 plus years. And for him, I wonder if despite the fact he's still playing at a great level, he isn't getting to a point where he's like, man, I just want to be at home. Like, I don't want to go through the grind of having to keep my body in shape all year long, all this stuff and do all these things. Right. It's interesting. I think that's more where it is. I think it's more about that type of stuff, the allure of being done when you've been at it for so long. And I think he's also still positioning himself to try to own an NBA team. Maybe that's also why he opted into the contract. So maybe he's trying to play as long as he can to just stretch out and then just move into like ownership. I don't know. But I think with him, that's more where it's at. But I do question, like I said, if this is just flat out, regardless, his last year in LA. That's another piece of this. Like I mentioned earlier, I think this is probably just his last year in LA. So at that point, does he want to make this season about the retirement tour, or does he want to make it just his last year in LA, live in the moment, and then probably play 1 more year and retire back in Cleveland or something like that, or maybe go to Dallas and do a full-on ring chase there? I don't know what ultimately he would do. Last thing, people said, and have said, we would know if it's his last season because he'll announce it because he wants the retirement tour. Yeah, I do think so. I think that'll happen, but there's still months to announce it. Like, that's the thing. So, like, we're kind of talking about this a little bit early, of course, and it remains to be seen, but he's still got time. It's not like he has to announce it now. But I will say I'm a little bit salty that he did that little Amazon promo, for Prime Day. And he had that little, people are asking, is this your last year in the NBA, LeBron? He knows what he's doing, man. All right, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe here to the Basketball Bulletin, where Trevor Lane and I keep you guys informed on all of the happenings around the NBA. I'll see you later.